Hello everyone, this is Taryn with Wonderfully Made Handcrafting, and I can't wait to show you something fun today. Today we're going to be dyeing some seam binding. I've been doing this lately for different kits and projects I'm working on. I love grabbing just the white rayon seam binding and then dyeing it whatever color I need. But first off, let me show you kind of what you need for this project. It's definitely going to get messy, so make sure you have some paper towels on hand. You may also want to make sure that you're wearing a shirt that you don't care if it gets ruined. I haven't ruined a shirt yet, but you may want to. You also have to have gloves or else your hands will be dyed for a number of days, so grab some gloves. You can use distress spray stains or distress oxide spray to complete this project, but if you don't have these, you can also just use ink pads. I have these two distress oxide ink pads. You can use whatever kind of ink you have. I actually use both these and these together, and you're also going to want to use a spray bottle. I have the distress sprayer, but no big deal if you don't have the distress sprayer itself. Any water bottle will do. And you also want a heat tool to heat set this and make it dry faster. So let's go ahead and get started on this project. So first things first, make sure you put those gloves on so your hands don't get too dirty. I am grabbing this Distress Spray Stain in Red Candy Apple, and I'm just going to spray this seam binding pretty heavily because my main color for this seam binding is going to be a deep dark red. Now obviously this red is brighter and that's not what I'm going for, so that's why I'm using multiple colors. I also grabbed this frayed burlap and I'm just going to spray that heavily on top of it as well to grunge it up a little bit. And I'm basically making a puddle and then using my fingers to make sure that every single part of this seam binding is colored. If you're using Tim Holtz's dye and distress oxide inks, I prefer to do the dye inks first. That's why I did those distress spray stains first. I like to saturate it in the stain first because the oxides kind of take over a little bit sometimes. And so that's why I want my saturation first to be with the dye ink. Every once in a while, you may want to clean up your puddles of ink so they don't get too messy on you. But before I move on to my Distress Oxide ink pads, I am going to dry this seam binding, simply because I want to see the actual color once it's dry and because it'll be able to take on more ink once it's dry again. Now, I prefer to dry my seam binding on my mixed media mat. I just kind of floof it around a little bit and make sure that it's drying on all the different sides. You don't have to have it completely dry to move on to the next step, and you don't even have to dry it at all in between any of the inks. It's just my personal preference. So here I am moving on to my oxide inks. This is Aged Mahogany. As you saw there, I did add some sprays of water to make my own puddle, so it looks kind of like that distress spray stain. So that's basically what we're making with the ink pads as well. We're just going to keep on creating puddles and getting that ink all into the seam binding. I like to hold that seam binding and just kind of run it through my hands and make sure that that color is throughout the whole ribbon. But now we'll be moving on to that Seedless Preserves color. I want to bring more burgundy into this ribbon. And so I make sure to clean up that puddle and I just kind of run that ink pad down on my mixed media mat. Like I said before, you could also use a craft mat. And I'm making that puddle again by spraying some more water. And I'll just make sure that everything is completely soaked. Now, one of my favorite things about this is basically just the science experiment of it. I love mixing the colors and creating my own colors to match whatever project I'm working on. I've used this seam binding in 2 different projects lately. One, I did a memory decks card from my By the Wall for God's Witness to the Wonder. And then I also used it to create a little bow on top of my accordion book, which is a Christmas present I'm making for my parents. So there's so many different ways to use this stuff, and it is so much fun. Now there's a couple of different steps you could go from here once you have it all dyed. The first time I did this, I actually put it in a little plastic baggie in the corner of the bag and then wrapped some rubber bands around it. That was to make it extra crinkly because it makes this beautiful crinkle texture. But if you're impatient like I am most of the time, what you can do is just crinkle it with your hands as you're drying it. This is the final dry. This is what the color I want it to be. And so I'm just kind of scrunching it up in my hands and drying it with my heat tool at the same time. And this dries super fast, so you can use it right away. And that's basically it. That's how you dye your own seam binding. If you've enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to my channel. You can go ahead and follow me over on Instagram at Wonderfully Made Handcrafting. I will link everything I use down below, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye.